Hello there, AP Environmental Science class. Welcome back to part 2 of my lecture on Chapter 13, Water Resources. We left off last time talking about how dams, while they are effective at helping sustain some water resources, dams are also bad at or not helpful when it comes to a lot of environmental issues. And we were kind of talking about that, the benefits and the non-benefits of dams. And now we kind of move into more of that, talking about how, again, while dams are a way to help with the water scarcity, unfortunately, they do provide a lot of economic and ecological issues. So, for instance, how dams can kill an estuary. We talked about this in part 1. We talked about how the Colorado River, only a small amount of that water now reaches the Gulf of Mexico. And a lot of that is because of dams that have been put on the Colorado River, again, to help with water resources, right? You dam up a river, you make a big reservoir, and then you can use that reservoir to irrigate crops, for people to drink. But unfortunately, it also stops water from flowing. So again, only a small amount is reaching the Gulf of California, and this, of course, threatens aquatic species in the river and species that live in the estuary. Again, that's where the river meets the Gulf of California. If you don't have a lot of water coming in, then obviously the biodiversity in those estuaries will be unfortunately reduced. The current rate of river withdrawal, again, is not sustainable. That's why we're seeing this issue with not enough water reaching the Colorado River, not enough water from the Colorado River reaching the Gulf of California. And again, that's because we're pulling too much water out of the river, and also inefficient use of irrigation water for agriculture. We talked about that, also wasting water. So in a couple of slides, we're actually going to talk about some better ways to irrigate your crops, more efficient ways. We'll be talking about that in about 10 minutes or so. So, here are some proposed actions for United States, or the states in the U.S. here that are using the Colorado River. What can we do to kind of help the issue of this reduced water flow? First off, you can enact strict conservation measures. You can phase out agricultural subsidies. Again, these subsidies from the government, again, paying people to have these big farms. If you phase that out, could stop some of that wasteful irrigation, shift water-thirsty crops to less arid areas. So again, if you have a crop that you're growing that it really needs a lot of water, don't grow that crop in an area that doesn't get a lot of water, right? Instead, grow crops that don't need as much water in arid areas, and grow crops that need water in areas that are not arid. And again, we could raise the price of fresh water. If we raise the price of fresh water, then I think people would stop wasting it and would find more ways to use it more efficiently. So in 2014, the Morealis Dam near Yuma, Arizona, again, this is another dam on the Colorado River, was open for 2 months to release water through the Delta into the Gulf of California. The results were dramatic. A lot of biodiversity came back, but unfortunately, they were short-term results as, again, the dam was closed once again, and now here we are heading through the 21st century, and we are seeing these problems resurfacing once again along the Colorado River. So again, dams are good, but dams are also bad. The National Environmental Policy Act requires that an environmental impact statement be developed for any federal project likely to have an effect on environmental quality. So this is a critical concept, just talking about the National Environmental Policy Act. And again, this has impact on water, soil, air quality, wildlife habitat, etc. So just understand that this NEPA requires an environmental impact statement for any federal project that will have an effect on environmental quality. So that's a good start. Again, at least we'll know kind of what's going to happen, the impacts on the soil, the water, the air quality, etc. Unfortunately, though, enforcing these policy acts, as you know, harder, better, or easier said than done, I guess, would be the cliche to use. All right, so moving on now, another way that we can hopefully in the future reduce our water scarcity is by removing salt from seawater to provide fresh water. We have a lot of seawater out there, right, that we can use, but unfortunately, salt water, you can't irrigate crops, you can't drink salt water, so we need to come up with ways to turn that salt water into fresh water. So we do have some methods of these desalinization methods. That's what they're called, desalinization, right, taking the salt away. One is called distillation, and the other is called reverse osmosis. We have more than 17,000 desalination plants currently operating in about 150 countries. Most of the nations that are taking the lead in this are from our arid nations, or nations that are in deserts, right? So Middle Eastern nations, North African nations, Caribbean, and the Mediterranean, where they don't get a lot of water. The problem with these desalination methods is currently the cost is very high. You have to use a lot of energy to produce these methods, and you have large amounts of salty wastewater that we need to do something with. So these are the issues right now. And again, this could be a very efficient way in the future to provide fresh water. So maybe one of you guys here listening to this lecture will be the ones that can come up with a better technology to do desalination that will reduce the cost and reduce the energy use. And if we can do that, then I think we will see more of these methods popping up around the world. So let's talk about them a little bit. The first one was called reverse osmosis. That's basically on the left here. What you have is salt water in A, but there's a force, all right? You force the seawater from one chamber through a semi-permeable membrane into another chamber. The semi-permeable membrane basically stops the salt particles in the water, the salt molecules, from getting from basically tank A over here to this other tank, right? So that's reverse osmosis. We're forcing the salt water through this semi-permeable membrane, which leaves the salt behind and provides us with just fresh water. That's then the fresh water comes out of D, right? There's your distillation. We haven't talked about that yet. We're coming up on that. Here's your D, all right, which is the fresh water. And then C is actually that salty, kind of briny water that is left over, and that goes out here, C, and that can be collected and discarded somewhere else. Distillation is when we actually take salt water and we heat it into steam. The steam then rises up and then condenses. Well, when the water evaporates, only the fresh water evaporates. The salt stays behind. So once again, we have this, we kind of have this brine that's left over, this salty brine that then we can collect for processing. But the fresh water turns into vapor and then condenses, kind of rains out again. In a way, it's kind of like producing rain inside this tank, and that then produces the fresh water that then is collected and used. So again, reverse osmosis, pushing that salt water through a semi-permeable membrane, leaving the salt behind, we get fresh water. Or distillation, which is where we evaporate salt water, only the fresh water evaporates. We then condense that vapor, that water vapor, into liquid freshwater drops, which are collected and used. All right, so these are two ways to remove salt from seawater to provide fresh water. But again, right now, costs a lot, need to use a lot of energy. And so unfortunately, we're not seeing these pop up everywhere. But again, some countries are starting to do it. And again, if we can reduce the cost and reduce the energy use, we have a lot of salt water out there. So this could be a way in the future that we could provide more fresh water to people. Another way is to transfer water, right? So we talked about how there is enough water on the planet to supply everyone with what they need water-wise, but unfortunately, the water is not distributed evenly. That's an issue. So what could we do? We can transfer water from one place to another. So basically, if you have a place that has a lot of water, we can take that water and transfer it to another place that doesn't have enough water. The problem is this has disrupted ecosystems, right? You're taking water away from an area that has a lot of water. You're putting that in an area that doesn't really have a lot of water, and that can obviously disrupt ecosystems. Might help us human beings, irrigate our crops, have fresh water to drink. But when we talk about the ecosystems and biodiversity, could have issues with that. So again, water transfers do have benefits and drawbacks. So in China, the South to North Water Diversion Project, this actually diverts 6 trillion gallons of water per year. In California, the Central Valley, there are aqueducts that help to divert water to areas that need it. The problem is we lose a lot of water through evaporation and leaks. So again, we're transferring this water, but it's not an efficient transfer. It's an inefficient transfer of water. So again, we're losing a lot of it. And again, you have that ecosystem degradation when you take water from one ecosystem and put it in another. Here we're looking at, again, this is basically the California State Water Project. Again, transfers high volumes of water from one watershed into another. These are the aqueducts, which help do that. So again, we're transferring water. And one side has benefits, right? People can drink. We have water to irrigate crops. But in another way, it can affect the biodiversity and the ecosystem of a particular area. So to talk about this a little more detail and a little more dramatic, I'm going to show you a pretty dramatic picture in a couple of slides of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea is in the Uzbekistan, on the Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan border. So this is again in kind of Eastern Europe, Western Asian area. Basically, large-scale water transfers in dry Central Asia has led to wetland destruction, basically turning an area that was a sea into a desert. Desertification has occurred. And again, I'm going to show you this picture in a little bit. It is a dramatic picture. We've greatly increased the salinity of the soil in the area. Fish extinctions and decline of fishing happened because of this. Blowing salt and dust destroyed wildlife and crops away from the sea because you had this sea that evaporated. It had some salt in it. Now that salty kind of ground is blown away to other areas, and that is destroying wildlife and crops. And believe it or not, it's increased glacial melting in the Himalayas, the destruction of the Aral Sea. So the shrinkage of the Aral Sea has also altered local climate. Hot, dry summers, colder winters now, and a shortened growing season. That's because water moderates climate because of its high specific heat, right? Water takes forever to heat up, forever to cool down. So now without the water, the summers are much hotter than they used to be, and the winters are much colder than they used to be in that area, which has shortened the growing season. There have been some restoration efforts, cooperation of neighboring countries, some more efficient irrigation has helped, and there was a dike construction that actually raised level of the northern part of the sea, which did help a little bit. So here is the dramatic picture, guys. 1976 on the left. Here's the Aral Sea. Here's 2015. It is pretty much gone again. So what happened? Water was diverted from this sea to help people in this area farm and have drinking water. But unfortunately, the water was pumped out much quicker than it was able to replenish itself. And now this is what you have as a consequence. And you'll notice this whiteness. That is salt, right? That is salt that has now the water evaporated, leaving the salt behind, like in that distillation process, right? But unfortunately, now this salt is left behind on ground. That again, air blows here and blows all this salt to other areas that has basically destroyed the entire environment around the Aral Sea. So again, if this isn't a dramatic photo, if this doesn't show you why we're having freshwater issues, I really don't know what does, because this is again very, very dramatic. The Aral Sea disaster. Definitely understand what happened here, because you may need to answer some questions on this. All right, so obviously, we've gone through all the issues. Now we need to figure out how can we use freshwater more sustainably so we don't see pictures like this happening anymore. We don't want to see this happen anymore. So how do we use that freshwater more sustainably? Ways to use it more sustainably: cut water waste, right? Fix those leaky pipes, fix that inefficiency of watering plants, raise water prices so that people think twice before they waste it, slow population growth. Obviously, that solves a lot of our problems, right? When we talk about ecosystem and environmental science, protect aquifers, forests, and other ecosystems that store and release fresh water, because again, we're going to need those areas for that fresh water. So cutting water waste would have many benefits. Think about this, guys. 1/2 to 2/3 of water is wasted, either through evaporation, leaks, or inefficient use. The cost of water to users is very low. Government subsidies mask the true cost of water. No subsidies for improved efficiency. So what should happen is, again, if we increase the cost of water, but give subsidies, if you use water more efficiently, that obviously would probably help conserve water, because people would think twice if the cost of water was higher, and therefore would hopefully use it more efficiently and not waste it. But unfortunately, there's always the yang to the yin, right? You're raising prices, however, could hurt lower income farmers and city dwellers. So the solution could be establish lifeline rates, meaning if you're poor, if you are lower income, maybe you would be charged less for water than, let's say, if you were rich and affluent, then maybe you would be charged more for water. I'm not sure exactly how that would work from a fairness standpoint, but again, it is an idea. So we can improve efficiency in irrigation. Irrigation is a big issue, irrigating crops, and again, we're wasting a lot of water when we irrigate crops. So those who use flood irrigation, this is kind of the old school where you just kind of flood the fields, have water running through the fields. This is kind of a traditional way to irrigate. However, 45% of the water is actually lost and not used by the crops that you're trying to irrigate. So think about that. It may be a quick way and a cheap way to irrigate, and we'll look at this in just a second when I show you a graph or show you some kind of visual. But again, in flood irrigation, 45% of the water is lost. What a waste. Right? What a waste of water. All right. So we need more efficient techniques to irrigate. One is called a center pivot low pressure sprinkler. Again, I'll show you a picture of that in a second. We have low energy precision application sprinklers. And then we have something called drip or trickle irrigation or micro irrigation. It is costly, that last one here, the drip or trickle, the micro irrigation, but you have much less water waste. So again, while it may be a little bit initial cost up front, over time, the water waste is going to be less, and so that should help with some of the cost. So you'll notice what we're looking at here on the left is the gravity and flowing way to irrigate. This is kind of your flood irrigation, and again, we're just kind of flooding the fields here, but again, only about 60%. Efficiency, right? Over 40% of the water is actually going to be wasted. If you use surge valves, then you can get up to 80% efficiency with only 20% being wasted. But again, not the best way. Water usually comes from an aqueduct system or a nearby river. Here's your drip irrigation. Look at that, 90 to 95% efficient. This means we're only wasting 5 to 10% of the water here. Basically, you have these tubes that come out with basically little holes in them, and the water goes through the pipes and just drips out of those little holes in the pipes. The issue is why this is good is that because it's a slow drip, the plants are able to take up all that water. Here on the left, right, you just flood this, the plants take up some water, but they can't take it all up that fast. So a lot of it rushes down into the groundwater and basically is lost. In the drip, because it's so slow, the plants are able to pick up most of the water, and only 5 to 10% is wasted. Here's your center pivot. Basically, you have a center pivot. This is a center, and you're pivoting a sprinkler system around the center, and you'll notice you have nozzles there that are spraying out water. 80% efficiency with low pressure sprinkler, 90 to 95 with a NEPA sprinkler. All right, so again, you could get much higher efficiencies. Water usually pumped from underground and sprayed from a mobile boom with sprinklers. All right, here we have above or below ground pipes or tubes deliver water to individual plant roots. Again, that's your drip irrigation. So just having a general understanding of these, if you need to write an FRQ about some ways to improve the efficiency of irrigation, again, drip the best, maybe a little costly, but it is the most efficient. Center pivot, got to have the next most efficiency with, again, this gravity flow, this flooding type of irrigation having the worst efficiency. And again, we're wasting a lot of water here. If we can stop wasting water in irrigation, that will save a lot of our fresh water per year around the globe. So again, solutions: reducing irrigation water losses, avoid growing thirsty crops in dry areas. Again, if your area is dry, grow a crop that doesn't need a lot of water. Import water-intensive crops and meat. Okay, again, don't grow them, import them. Encourage organic farming and polyculture to retain soil moisture. We spoke about that in a previous chapter. Monitor soil moisture to add water only when necessary. Again, you don't want to waterlog and have too much water. We talked about that in a previous unit as well, how that doesn't help plants. It doesn't help you either because you're wasting water. Expand the use of drip irrigation and those other efficient methods we talked about. Irrigate at night to reduce evaporation, right? When the sun is out during the day, a lot of that water gets evaporated by the sun's energy. So irrigate at night. That's why you're told when you water your lawn, I don't know if your parents, you've ever noticed your parents or even people around Ardsley, right? When are those sprinkler systems on? Usually around 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, 7, 8 p.m. at night. Why? Because you get less evaporation in the morning, at night, overnight than you do midday, right? So if you water midday, you're wasting a lot of water through evaporation. So irrigate at night. Line canals that bring water to irrigation ditches. Again, if you line the canals, you're not going to get water seeping through the canals, not even getting to where you're going to be irrigating. And irrigate with treated wastewater. That's something we're going to talk about in a slide or two here as well. Wastewater is being wasted, and if we can treat it with chemicals to take out the waste, then you have water. Irrigate with that. Okay, that could be another way that we can conserve. Poor farmers conserve water use using low-tech methods. So again, going back, we spoke about this in a previous chapter, but again, we're finding out that the traditional agricultural methods are actually just as good or better than the high-input industrialized agriculture that we've been doing with the Green Revolution, right? So human-powered treadle pumps bring water into irrigation ditches. Poor farmers harvest and store rainwater. They actually capture water from fog efficiently. Not a lot of other farmers are doing that. And they use polyculture to create canopy vegetation. What's canopy vegetation? Well, it's vegetation that kind of sits over your cropland, and that helps again to reduce evaporation because the sun's energy is being absorbed by that vegetation, not hitting the ground and evaporating the water out. So that's another way. So again, these poor farmers understand how to do this better than we do. This is one of those treadle pumps we were talking about. This is in Bangladesh, and basically where the water table is very high, you don't need to go down that far to get water. You can just use one of these I was going to say hand-use pumps. It looks like she's using her feet to kind of do this pump right up and down, but that's a way to pull water out of the ground and then to irrigate their fields here. So again, these are low-tech ways, but they actually conserve water better than the high-tech ways that we've been using. So we need to cut water. We need to cut freshwater loss in industry and homes. All right. So now moving away from agriculture, how can we cut these freshwater losses not only in our homes but in industry? So recycle water that is used in industry. We should be recycling it. Use low-flow toilets, shower heads, and front-loading washing machines. All right, I know I have a front-loading washing machine. I don't have a low-flow toilet, but I do have a shower head that is one of those low-flow shower heads. You can save a lot of water just yourself by doing this. Thick leaks in the plumbing system, right? We say that leaking loses so much a percentage of the water, so fix those leaks. Use native plants and landscaping. So again, going back to that, don't buy if you live in California, don't buy plants that need a lot of water to landscape your yard. That makes no sense, right? If you live in California where it's dry, get plants native to the area in your landscaping that don't need a lot of water, right? Use gray water and use water meters to reduce water use. They can help us if you actually can see how much water you're using. That could help reduce that waste as well. So what we're looking at here is a yard in Encinitas, California, which again uses local plants. Beautiful landscaping here. All these plants are local, meaning they are arid plants. They don't need a lot of water because California doesn't get a lot of rain, right? Especially in areas near the coast. So again, using the native plants in your landscaping and not importing plants that may not be able to survive in either a low water or a high water environment. So other ways to reduce water losses: redesign manufacturing processes to use less water. Again, recycle water in industry. Again, fix those water leaks. Again, landscape yard with plants that require little water. Use the drip irrigation on gardens and lawns. Use water-saving shower heads, faucets, appliances, and toilets. Collect and reuse gray water in and around houses, apartments, and office buildings. And again, raise those water prices and use meters, especially in dry urban areas that will basically force people to conserve water. We also need to use less water to remove waste. So large amounts of fresh water is used to flush away waste. We need to reuse that wastewater. Only about 7% of wastewater is currently recycled. So that means 93% is being lost. If we can reuse some of that wastewater, that will greatly reduce the amount of water we need to pump out of aquifers or reservoirs. And again, use those waterless composting toilets. I don't know if I'm ready for that yet, but again, these are just some ways again that we can conserve water. So how can we again continue to use water more sustainably, protect our water supplies, apply strategies at the local, regional, national, and international levels, and also apply strategies at a personal level. Again, you yourself try to use less fresh water and try to use it more efficiently using the kind of some of the tips that we've talked about in this lecture. So again, just some more. What can you do? Use those water-saving toilets, take shorter showers instead of baths, turn off sink faucets when brushing teeth, shaving, washing. You've heard a lot about this stuff before. Wash only full loads of clothes, repair those leaks, wash your car from a bucket of soapy water. If you use a commercial car wash, try to find one that recycles water. Replace your lawn with plants that need little watering. Water lawns and gardens, again, early morning, evenings, and use that drip irrigation and mulch for gardens and flower beds to keep them moist. All right, last thing we'll talk about is flooding. Flooding is a waste of water, basically. So we talk about some ways to reduce the threat of flooding. We can lessen the threat of flooding by protecting wetlands and natural vegetation in watersheds and not building in areas that are subject to frequent flooding. What is a floodplain? A floodplain is an area flooded when a stream overflows its channel. You do get fertile soils for farming in a floodplain, and it does recharge groundwater and refills wetlands. However, human activities have damaged floodplains. Vegetation removal and the draining of wetlands has unfortunately led to damage of those floodplains. In addition, rising sea levels from global warming means more coastal flooding. And again, coastal flooding is not what you want because that's salt water inundating a freshwater estuary or a freshwater stream or a freshwater aquifer. Again, once salt water gets into your freshwater, unfortunately, that fresh water becomes useless because it is now salty. So what we're talking about here, again, deforestation, unfortunately, leads to flooding. So you'll notice on the left here, a forested hillside. We have a diverse ecological habitat, evapotranspiration. Trees reduce soil erosion from heavy rain and wind. Tree roots stabilize soil. Vegetation releases water slowly and reduces the flooding. Unfortunately, when you deforest an area, now you get gullies and landslides. Evapotranspiration decreases. Overgrazing accelerates soil erosion, wind removes topsoil, and then unfortunately heavy rain erodes topsoil, and then you get agricultural land that is flooded and gets silted up and then unfortunately is useless. So again, another thing we need to do, stop cutting down trees. Obviously, we spoke about how trees are harbingers of biodiversity. They sequester carbon, but they also reduce flooding, right? So again, this is just some of that natural capital that the earth provides us. And if we take away those trees, then we are not getting provided all these positive effects that the forests do provide us. So a case study, living dangerously on the floodplains in Bangladesh, dense population on coastal floodplain, moderate floods can maintain the fertile soil, but unfortunately a recent increased frequency of severe floods, not helpful. Destruction of coastal wetlands, again, clearing the mangrove forest increases your storm damage, and adapting, they're using more flood-tolerant crops in Bangladesh, but again, take a look at that core case study in the book and make sure you understand it. So last two slides here, reducing flood risks, rely more on nature's systems, again, wetlands, natural vegetation, and watersheds, rely less on engineering devices like dams, levees, and channelized streams. Prevention, preserve forests and watersheds, preserve and restore wetlands on floodplains, tax development on floodplains, and increase use of floodplains for sustainable agriculture and forestry, control, strengthen and deepen streams, build levees or flood walls along streams, and again, you can build dams if you want to help control some of that flood damage. All right, so that concludes my part 2 of my lecture on Chapter 13, Water Resources, and as always, thanks for listening.